Melanin Symposium. As the coordinator of these events, it has been my privilege to see this occasion grow from one single lecture event to a whole series of events such as we're having today. Today's schedule will include the round table of faculty people that you see seated on the table. And then at 1:15 this afternoon, we're going to have a children's performance called The Magic of Color. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, there will be a slide and lecture presentation by Dr. Sam Isaacs. And this evening, at 7 o'clock, we're going to be honored to have with us Hunter Adams, who's going to be talking about melanin in terms of a biological property and its interaction with the nervous system. So that I hope that you will be able to take advantage of all of those events. And then I might add, it's also been a privilege for me to be part of an occasion in which we're celebrating blackness as a color. The phrase black is beautiful was originated in the 60s. And at that time, we were confronting the stigma of dark pigmentation. Now, we've learned a good deal more about the molecule, melanin, that results in dark pigmentation, and we know that melanin is not only beautiful to look at, but it is distributed throughout the body and is beneficial to many of the body systems. So I welcome you to take part in our events, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Robert Johnson, who is going to act as the moderator for the faculty discussion. And I might point out that we will be dialoguing with each other as faculty. However, there will be an empty chair here, and any of you at any time can come up and occupy the empty chair and take part in the dialogue. And if somebody else wants to come up, they will simply tap the person who is in the empty chair, and then you would have to leave. After the dialogue with the among the professors, we will open the aisle mic, and you may address questions to the panel. Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Robert Johnson.
Well, I would also like to add my welcome to our third Melanin Symposium. Our theme this year is melanin from an academic perspective. I suspect everyone is pretty much aware that there is quite a lot of discussion that is taking place today about melanin. Sociologists are studying melanin. Psychologists are studying melanin. Public Enemy is rapping about melanin. Just this year, the chemists are now creating melanin in the laboratory using one of the most modern techniques, recombinant DNA. Wall Street Journal is publishing articles about melanin. Science Times is also publishing about melanin. As Professor Rock just mentioned, we're finding out today that melanin certainly has come a long way from when scientists thought that it was simply a waste product from metabolism in the central nervous system, to recognizing that melanin is this skin pigment, and we've been pretty much focused on that particular idea until it was also discovered that melanin is distributed throughout the body. Melanin is a very important part of the composition of the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. We find melanin as part of the composition of some of our vital organs, the heart, the brain, the liver, kidneys. There's sort of certainly a theory that nature does not provide anything in an organism unless it has a function. In other words, as we say, there are no wasted strokes. So if we believe in that theory, or if we suspect that it has validity, then to find melanin in these various important places in our bodies, then indeed it perhaps has some vital function. And I would say that what perhaps is going on today is that we are evolving in terms of our information about the role of melanin in our very important biological processes. Some of the information that we have is pretty firm. There's not a lot of question about the fact that melanin protects against harmful ultraviolet rays. We know that this protection leads those that have melanin to very low incidence of skin cancer. And skin cancer happens to be one of the fastest growing cancers on the planet today. So we pretty much are firm in the belief that melanin plays a protective role against harmful ultraviolet radiation. But there is a lot that is being said about melanin that the evidence is perhaps still out, or the evidence is being developed. If you looked at your flyers, you notice that there are many statements that have been attributed to melanin. It says, for instance, that melanin plays a role in memory and information processes. We know that melanin is a molecule that indeed can absorb a wide range of electromagnetic energies. And many believe that some of this energy is absorbed and converted into the memory modes of the brain, which is stored and ends up as knowledge. So indeed, if a person has a good bit of melanin in the brain, the inference might be that there's a higher capacity for storing information and processing information. However, that particular point is controversial. We know that melanin is found throughout the muscles, and in the brain stem portion of the brain that controls motor skills. So if it's said that those who have melanin perhaps have a higher capacity for athletic performance based on the utilization of melanin, that is also very controversial. We can say that melanin is involved also in our social behavior, because if one is enclosed in the vital organs and also the skin, that's going to influence emotional expression. Another controversial item about melanin. Many people believe that melanin gives special qualities. And what is going on today is that scientists and professionals are trying to determine what these special qualities might be. Some people feel that melanin should be promoted because it will develop self-esteem in those that have a good bit of melanin. So melanin is being considered from many, many angles. And what we want to do this morning is to have you listen in on faculty members who are going to discuss this topic of melanin. We have sitting at the round table Professor Edith Rock, who you were introduced to a moment ago. To her right, we have Dr. Sheila Myers Johnson, who is the director of our honors program. And in fact, melanin is the topic for the first honors seminar. I would dare say that probably this is probably the first organized curriculum in the country that has been developed around melanin. So in that regard, we certainly feel that we are out front in our discussion of melanin. Next to Dr. Johnson is Dr. Doris Withers, who, even though you may know her through institutional research, she is a biologist by training, and her special interest is in the area of genetics. Next to her is Dr. Sam Isaacs, who is a microfacial dentist. Perhaps I have that term not quite correct, but he doesn't pull teeth. He works with broken jaws and things of that sort. Sam has had a very, very long-standing interest in African culture, and he also has a particular interest in our topic of today. Next to Sam is Professor Aola Thompson, who is in the physical education area. Her particular focus is dance, and she's interested in how is melanin involved in movement? Does it enhance or perhaps have no influence? Next to Aola is Dr. Patricia Ferdinand, who is the chairperson of the Natural Science Division. Dr. Ferdinand is a cell biologist, and in some of her investigations, she's had to consider melanin. And next to her is someone who's very, very new to us, Dr. Ann Brown. She is also a cell molecular biologist. In fact, in a couple of months, she will deliver a paper at the National Melanin Symposium. So we're also very happy to have her share in our conversation. So I guess at this point, what we will do is simply turn on the mic and begin our discussion of melanin. Basically, what we want to do is to know what information is supportive and substantive about what we know about melanin, and what information perhaps one might consider to be a very, very broad extrapolation of the role of melanin. Thank you. I think what we'll do, the first speaker to sort of set our tone will be Dr. Sheila Myers Johnson, who has wide knowledge about Afrocentric philosophies, and I always enjoy hearing her connect the Afrocentric or the African system in terms of natural inquiry to what we are talking about today.
highly speculative area, making the leap from what is known about melanin scientifically to some observations that we can make about people who are highly melanated and raise some questions about the relationship between the cultures, worldviews, expressive systems of highly melanated people and the physiological basis for what we observe. For a number of years, it's intrigued me to pay attention to what we call the African worldview, the African way of knowing and experiencing the world. And I think we can make some observations about differences between that African worldview and the Western view of the world. We see the Western view of the world, for example, as kind of compartmentalized, linear, orderly, sequential. What is known is knowable by a separation of yourself from what you see and measuring it, putting it in some sort of sequential order in the life. By contrast, the African way of viewing the world, I perceive to be, many people perceive to be rather connective, holistic, integrated, and an area that I find rather fascinating is the way that that holistic, connective, harmonizing way of viewing the world is reflected in language.
For a moment, Sheila, I think what you're saying is really fascinating. I wonder, perhaps if those of us at the table who are scientists, or natural scientists, might pick up on your point of expressiveness. Is there anything in the research involved? I think I would direct this to you. Is there anything in the research that is supportive of Sheila's observation that perhaps melanin is related to expressiveness? Is that a point that could be raised?
Indeed it is. Since melanin is considered to be a central component of our nervous system, and we know that our nervous systems pretty much have influence on how we exhibit our emotions. And when you consider the fact that no matter where on the planet you find melanated people, there seems to be a very, very common thread in terms of their emotional characteristics. You may have individuals or segments that are rather isolated and don't have wide contact with many portions of the world, and yet when it comes to expressive behavior, we see a very, very common way of behaving. In the laboratory, scientists are conducting experiments on animals. And very often, as an example of what might be done, is to observe this animal under normal circumstances. Perhaps train the animal to do a certain activity, and then treat the animal either with a chemical that inhibits the synthesis of melanin, or to cut a portion of the spinal cord or the brain stem that does not allow the animal to produce melanin anymore. And then observe the animal under those conditions. And basically what has been concluded is that the behavior is different, the emotional behavior in the animal is different. Those things that the animal has been taught are forgotten. And when you try to retrain the animal under the condition in which they no longer synthesize melanin, the training is not effective. And so, based on those types of experiments, it is concluded that obviously melanin had something to do with the behavior of the animal, whether it be expressive or learning, that somehow when you change the condition where melanin is no longer produced, the animal is now abnormal.
Well, Bob, let me ask you, if that's so, such a well-documented issue, why are we getting such challenges to this expression of beginning? Are any of you at the table aware that this is not as accepted as in some areas as in others?
No, well, one of the things you find that historically Western academia has been replete with bigotry and racism. No question about it. We live in a society which is replete with it, you know. So you will definitely have opposition from all corners, with respect to this information.
Well, does the opposition really challenge some of the very specific things that Bob mentioned?
Well, the opposition may challenge, but what the opposition do is suppress information. Suppression also distorts information and also miseducate. Because this is the emphasis of the opposition. Distort information, suppress information. They have information, but they would not allow you to get information. And we have, you know, at least you have 2,000, you know, sources, at least 2,000 minimum of research work done with melanin. And the majority of people who have been doing this is the opposition. They know the truth. For example, one of the most common drugs that is used in mental health for antipsychotic behavior is promethazine. Now, promethazine has an affinity for melanin. Now, the question here you have to ask, now, what is happening with Africans in the diaspora who are being given this promethazine chronically?
Well, are all physicians who are describing the drug aware of that? Since this
No, they're not.
information is not widely available, they may not be aware. And part of our job, it seems to me, as educators, is to find out what specific areas have implication for treatment and therapy, and then raise that level of awareness.
Agreed, because here you have physicians, psychiatrists in mental health. You know, this is the standard drug they use for antipsychotic behavior. And as a matter of fact, all of the drugs that are used to treat antipsychotic behavior have an affinity for melanin, every one. And so what happens, you see the extrapyramidal effects, you know, in these patients, such as tremor, rigidity, dystonia. So what happens then as a result of using this drug, you see, there's a depletion of neuromelanin. So once you have a decrease in the neuromelanin in the central nervous system, you see the Parkinsonian type of disorders being manifested.
So that's just a matter, though, of people not being aware or perhaps not being interested in the topic, not so much a matter of trying to distort or keep information down, as I say that.
But for instance, if the medical field knows that certain chemicals are detrimental to a person that has a good bit of melanin, you would think that they would stop giving them those chemicals. And I think what Sam is saying is that they just simply disregard the information. It's known from basic science, and just as Sam is saying, that there are many chemicals that have this strong affinity. One of them that we perhaps will talk about during our discussion is cocaine. It has the strongest affinity of any chemical that has been investigated for melanin. What that means is that if these chemicals are attached to your neuromelanin, then that's going to cause your mental processes to go off balance. And it's said that those with melanin get higher highs and deeper lows. And then also what happens, because the body does not process it as quickly as in the case of a non-melanated person, it means that this material builds up. And you can imagine if the melanin has to be in good state in order for your nervous system to properly function, and if it has all these chemicals attached to it, then that means that the melanin is abnormal and that your nerves will not fire properly. And then when you also look at the fact of how things are done, the fact that the Wall Street Journal will talk about the next big item that will come out on the market, telling people to invest money. As I stated in the Science Times a couple of months ago, it was published that one of the first chemicals that the recombinant DNA technique is about to market is melanin. And you can imagine what plant makes the melanin. They're not going to allow those folks in North Carolina and South Carolina to go out of business because we stopped smoking. They're using the tobacco plant to produce melanin. They've already talked to the governor of the state of North Carolina, asking them to allow acreage to be set aside to allow the tobacco to make the melanin. Now, Francis Crofts Wesson says that perhaps the root of the racism is this genetic envy that they're not able to make melanin. That envy won't be there in the future because a person will simply buy this cream, and they're talking about how dark do you want to be, because they'll have different amounts of application, so you can have any appearance. And then, of course, the one thing that I read was that you don't have to worry about, having bra and panty lines, because you'll be able to be tanned all over. So, if it turns out that melanin gives special qualities, the scientific community will figure out ways to put the melanin in the appropriate places. The first start, and you'll see it within the next year or two, will be to put melanin on the skin. Because they're saying that there's no better molecule to stop harmful radiation than the melanin. And so they're figuring out a way scientifically for them to get what those who naturally can do. And so, again, that is some sort of inference there.
In addition to what Dr. Johnson was saying, I happened to read the Wall Street Journal, February 1987, and I came across an article that I kept that had to do with the fact that they have patented a synthetic melanin right now. They probably are using it, but I don't think it's quite successful with them because those synthetic melanin molecules are artificial, they're plastic, they're synthetic, and they're not going to disperse the same way your natural melanin will do. In addition, and they may kill themselves off and get more cancer. In addition, there is some researcher, he's a Caucasian man in Atlanta, who is doing research on, he has a kit that he has designed to differentiate the alkaloid, which is the end product of cocaine metabolism, and also melanin. They're similar kind of alkaloids. He has a test to distinguish the two, and the courts don't want to accept this kit because they want to keep on doing what they're doing. So, but it can't, the alkaloid of cocaine metabolism and the alkaloid of melanin metabolism can be distinguished.
While our guest is getting seated for a moment, I just wanted to remind us of the statement that Admiral Sanford made, I believe, a couple of years ago, which was interpreted to be a negative statement, and that involved the matter that melanin may bind or bond with the narcotics that you've been mentioning. And for that reason, perhaps very highly melanized people may become addicted and stay addicted longer to some of these narcotics. And at the time, there was a great deal of resentment about that statement. And I think perhaps a discussion like this might add some clarity to that.
Well, I'm not too clear about the binding. I'm sure there must be all drugs bind to something in the body. Whether a person stays high on a drug as a result of melanin, I'm not sure.
Well, oh, go ahead, Pat.
even though this has been looked into, there's not a lot of understanding as to how the brain peptides work, how they interrelate, and why these drugs have such a tight affinity or not to the receptors that they bind to in the brain. And then there's another point why there's such a lack of information. That is that you have to look at the groups that are involved in the research. Brain peptides are, there's certain groups over the country that do this kind of investigation. It's a term. They're not interested in melanin.
Well, what I was getting at was
their focus
something
is different, and consequently, I think that you have to look specifically at what the peptides, the opiates or whatever, are doing in the brain.
Well, the explanation that I had heard was that the melanin molecule is very similar in structure to the molecule of these narcotics. And that similarity was the fact that created that kind of bonding. Now, that's a very simple kind of explanation.
Yes, but I think that
Does that make sense?
I think there's more to it than that.
I'm sure there is.
For instance, there is in the 50s and 60s, when we were in high school and early college years, we learned that the pituitary was the master gland. I learned that. And then when I went to graduate school, the hypothalamus became the brain became an endocrine gland, and it was releasing all these peptides that control the hormones that are being released by the pituitary gland. And then of course, if you read the article, pigment hormone may have color behavior. You'll see that the melanocyte inhibiting factor is produced by the hypothalamus, which releases the melanocyte stimulating hormone, which acts on the release of melanin or production of melanin in the melanocyte in these very cells. So that the control is in the brain. But there is another segment which we're not talking about, and that is melatonin. The melatonin that's produced by the pineal gland. And this whole the arc or the circle is not really the interrelationship of the different hormones is not understood. But we can look at, for instance, I can give an example. The hormone melatonin that's produced by the pineal gland. The release or the inhibition, of course, is controlled by light, the light that enters through your eyes. And melatonin influences what's called the luteinizing hormone or the follicle-stimulating hormone that's closely associated with sexual drive, the libido, and they talk about people of color having a stronger sexual drive, or it's associated with color, but it's all tied in there. And we just don't understand clearly what these different relationships, what's taking place in the brain. And we need to study more. But the studies are not being done. The focus is not in the right direction for us to get this kind of information. And if you look at the way research is being done, not a lot of people of color have the opportunity to do this kind of research.
So we have to get him from
In addition to what Dr. Ferdinand is saying, they are bypassing the melanin molecule, and what they're doing is calling it something else. I know heme. When you buy synthetic heme and you prepare it in the laboratory in some kind of solution, it is very brown, almost black, and you have to turn the lights out to make the solution. So they're calling that the hemin, which is oxygenated, and it is really probably heme. Cytochrome P450 system and all those systems are probably melanin related, but they are calling it by other names.
Anyone hold the microphone? Push it back over to the forward.
My name is Evangeline. I have 3 short questions. My name is Evangeline Pugh, and I have 3 short questions. One being that if melanin can be marketed, are we in any danger of being subject to experiment, for that use?
When you sit on the experiment, you're already on the experiment.
Personally, is it possible, is it possible, but is it probable that they would take one of us and say, well, okay, we're going to take it from you, and we're going to take it from you and market it? If they can't market it, you said do the tobacco. If they can't do it that way, is it possible they can take it from us?
Yeah, nice question, Dr. Brown.
Very good question. I like that question.
I like the question because it really indicates a common concern that individuals have, especially African Americans in this country, that we can use to our detriment to carry out scientific experiments, and that our history is replete with that. But another real question is, there is no scientific basis yet to use you for melanin. There's a concern, but on what basis scientifically would someone want to use you for melanin? We don't know that. And you personally, a person, meaning, I'm getting the feeling that you're asking, are they going to extract my melanin and use it commercially?
That's being done, Dr. Wilder.
That's
Right now, there's a study, a secret study, and we know about it, going on at St. Luke's Hospital here in the city, where they have a sister, and they're taking melanin from, extracting it from her. And I know the experiment. And what they usually do is take the natural thing and go in the lab and make an artificial stuff.
Well, that's true. We know that, but they extract blood from us too. I mean,
No, but they're studying. It must be a very detailed proposal.
Is it to the detriment of the person's well-being?
I don't know, but you remember the 26 young men that they killed in Atlanta?
Yeah.
In 6 months they had killed them. They were taking the foreskin from those. Some of them were retarded by the standards of retardation. They were extirpating the foreskin from those young men. Also in South Africa, they're doing it.
Okay. I'm not disputing that the way the social, political system exists, that we don't all run a risk of being violated in the name of advancement of science. I think that's something that we all have to be vigilant and concerned about. But part of that vigilance and concern is also to fully educate ourselves as best we can about the scientific process involved in the actual, what's actually happening. I think these kinds of discussions help us to become more sensitized to what is fact, reality, and what is fiction. Because we
not really know that.
That's the point.
Right.
We need to know more. We need to know more, not only to help us present, but help us also to control our own destiny. And I think that is a real concern. Beyond the concern of are they going to use me in some way, we need to also be well informed about how they're going to use it. What is the state of the research at this point?
One of the things that the article that I just shared with you from the Science Times is that the laboratory that is making the melanin sold several pounds already to another company that's going to put it into the cream. So basically, I think the feeling is that the plant can make the melanin as good as what the animal can do, as what people can do. So in that regard, there may not be this strong urge to need the human to get the melanin, because the feeling is that the plant can do an equally good job.
Actually, there is an existing example right now, insulin, which at one time was produced and taken from cattle, was used for diabetics. The insulin that's used today is bioengineered, and it is the precise molecule insulin that was used from cattle, with fewer side effects because it doesn't have to be purified and manipulated. So that the technology today would allow the development of syntheses of other kinds of known proteins, of which we are, and other kinds of chemicals which we know about, so that if it, as you, this article you just shared, which I had not read entirely, if the possibility is to, if they are capable of bioengineering a melanin, then I guess we go at less risk.
I think that was the
For
first
that
part.
particular issue,
Yeah,
for that
part.
particular source. But that does not mean there are not other risks which have been discussed previously at the roundtable in terms of the effects of certain drugs on highly melanated individuals.
I think also, in answer to your question, the great concern should be the indirect effect. In the sense that, for instance, there is a drug, a hypertensive drug on the market called Melanin XR. And it's said to be the drug for blacks. And hypertension.
Treatment of what?
Hypertension. Yes, and of course, there is the, I'm sure that the data probably supports that it's good for blacks. Now, when those things happen, you have to watch out for physicians who, prescribe drugs maybe because the pharmaceutical companies want them to gather data. Is this really so? Will you prescribe it to your black patients more so than to your white patients? Forget about the side effects. We need a certain amount of data. I think we need to be more concerned about that than are they going to take my medicine, and be more educated, as Dr. Withers says. We need to find the scientific facts, not just the social issues, but we need to really get down to the meat of what is really happening with this medicine.
There is a new drug that came from a laboratory where they just patented L-arginate. And the person that I was working with in the laboratory is from Czechoslovakia, and he did the blood pressure study. They had an idea, it's in the literature that L-arginate modulates hypertension, but they did the study in white rats. And there's another question to consider, whether
They
the
probably also did it in white male rats too. Yeah. That's also an issue.
Yeah, well,
in the
it's
literature
male
that they
rats.
tend not to
Male.
use
That's right. You're right.
males and females.
That's right. Okay.
I want
So I want to go back here too, that in regards to whether it would, that they make these drugs and they're intended for blacks. I'm sure that market is intended for blacks, because this is like we studied with hypertension and diabetes and blacks. But they didn't recognize the fact that there may be a difference in the effect of L-arginate in rats, male rats versus black people, because of the melanin.
Pat, I want to pick up on something you said too. You were saying that it's very important for us to get down and understand the research, the scientific research, and to see what seems to be significant. However, I think it's very difficult to separate this issue from the social issue. And I think no matter what you find out about melanin in the laboratory, that it never would attract the kind of interest to bring people out to talk about it and to create forums of community people unless it was associated with the social issue, the issue of skin color, and unless it was in some way an attempt to counteract the stigma that has been associated with that. So I do think that all the kind of esoteric experimentation in the world could go on in the laboratory, but that the interest, the general interest, and the awareness, I think, is very much tied up with the social issue.
I agree. And if we look at some other incidents, such as sickle cell anemia and AIDS, okay, more blacks die from sickle cell anemia, okay, or suffer from sickle cell anemia. And AIDS, a large percentage of the patients that die from AIDS are black because of their social habits in order to understand ourselves or to understand our behavior, we need to get more money directed into research that will help us understand what's going on. You know, the money is going into AIDS, not because blacks are dying from AIDS, but because people, you know, the actors and Elizabeth Taylor's friends, the important people are dying from AIDS. And so they're putting money in that direction. Not as much money is going into the research on sickle cell anemia. And that's what I'm talking about. That we need to, we see the manifestation of the melanin in our behavior and all that. But we really also need the research to handle it.
Let's hear the other question.
Last question is, change the thing a little bit. Diet. Can you develop your diet by maybe just eating naturally or whatever to increase your own melanin, or is it something that you know, is it mental or physical?
My response to that would be certainly the diet is important because the biosynthesis of melanin has been worked out in pretty good detail. And it's known that it starts with phenylalanine, which is an essential amino acid. So that means then that certainly an individual has to have quality protein in the diet to be sure that this particular amino acid is there, because in addition to the phenylalanine, we need tyrosine. Those are the really two very important ingredients. And the only way that we can get that is through our diet. So if a person has a poor diet, particularly in terms of protein, and that's where the vegetarian has to be very wise in the sense of mixing up the foods to be sure that all of the essential amino acids are there. Certainly a vegetarian diet is perhaps better than a meat eater's diet, but there is always this concern that you mix things properly to get all of the essential amino acids, and phenylalanine is the one that's necessary for melanin synthesis.
If you look at that melanin molecule, in the right-hand part of that worked out molecule is the menadiol segment of vitamin A. So you have to eat foods containing vitamin A in order to synthesize this complex molecule.
Before we go too far, I'd like a little bit of clarity from scientists among us. We've used terms such as non-melanated people and less melanated people. Would you clarify that a little bit in terms of the presence of melanin in the human body, and then also the relationship between what we call neuromelanin and the melanin that's responsible for pigmentation?
Yes, I can refer you to the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences. It has a whole volume, I don't recall the volume number, but there's a whole volume dedicated to the types of melanin. In fact, there may be a few papers in there, not the whole volume. And it sort of breaks it down where redhead people have a certain kind of melanin, brown people, and so on. White people usually have melanin called pheomelanin, and dark people have eumelanin. And it goes into the details. I would just reread the article so that's another.
Perhaps it should also be mentioned that as far as is known, all human beings make melanin. And what perhaps is not clear is that if an individual has a lot of pigment melanin, does that mean that there's more melanin in the brain and the central nervous system? And I have not seen that particular question answered in the literature.
There are two things. One, all human beings do not have melanin, right? Because there are albinos.
Would they have internal melanin?
They wouldn't have.
They wouldn't have any. I'm talking about skin pigmentation.
Oh, yeah. Because the question was the difference between that which is related to neuro
also the pigmentation of the skin. Those of you asking for clarity on that. If we are addressing pigmentation of the skin, there are individuals who do not have skin melanin. Those individuals are albino. Not to be confused with, I don't know what term to use when I say people normally found in the European, originally came from the European continent. The white city doesn't really have a term, have a real meaning biologically. It has a term, it has a meaning politically, socially. But usually when we speak of white people, we speak of people who do not have a lot of melanin. They, however, are not albinos in the sense of those individuals who do not have the ability to make melanin by virtue of a genetic disorder, of the same category, say, as sickle cell anemia or Tay-Sachs disease. There is at least there are at least two known types of albinos. I mean, when you look at them, they're the same, but there are two causes genetically, at least two causes of skin pigmentation albinism due to two lesions or two recessive genes. All right? And those individuals do not have melanin. And if you look at these albinos, they are color independent. In other words, you'll see there are quote-unquote Caucasian albinos, there are quote-unquote black albinos, Indian albinos, Asian albinos. They do not have skin color, they do not have color in their irises, their eyes, they do not have color in their hair.
Do you know if they make meat in town?
No, I do not know, because one of the things and I don't know a lot about the whole area of melanin. I've looked at it and seen that it's a very, very complex set of area of study. And I do not know the relationship of other melanin besides those controlled skin color to genetic lesions. But I would say that if all of these aspects of melanin are in fact related to small peptides or the enzymes that make these pigments, that there are genetic lesions or recessive genes that control them, that people could in fact lack melanin in other parts of the body because they're all controlled either by enzymes or by a structural protein. And so it's a very, very complex kind of question to answer in a way that you can say, oh yes, there are other kinds of genetic lesions for melanin. The two that are well documented and known are the ones that really skin pigmentation.
Well, basically, what is happening, we know for fact, as Donna said, that we do have inborn errors of metabolism with respect to this problem. All right? There's also evidence that they do have melanocytes. All right? But however, the problem is to what degree are they producing melanin? That's the question. Okay? One individual out in Iowa, he did some studies, and he found that they were not producing that many, that much amount of melanin. Okay, I forgot I have it at home. I forgot the name. But the fact is that these people that we're talking about, you have to think in terms of partial is important, partial genetic penetration. So when you talk about partial genetic penetration, that is the key to the answer. Because you don't have dominance at work. If you have dominance at work, you will expect the genes to work properly, and then you will have the aggregation of melanin. This is lacking because of the partial genetic penetration in these people who refer to as corpuscles.
There is an interesting phenomenon that Dr. Brown made reference to, but I'd like to go back to and it's really your question. type of melanin, because melanin is, it can be found in blood cells, or, the neural crest, which is the early nerve cord. And she was talking about heme, which is, for those of you who have taken biology, that part of the hemoglobin molecule, the pigmented part of the molecule. And in science, which is very fascinating to me, the processes in the cell are very similar of the production of these different molecules. Pigment molecules, heme, chlorophyll in the plant is a pigment, is very similar, right? And Dr. Brown says when you look at the heme, when you prepare heme, it's very dark. It's very dark. And something that's interesting is if you look at the embryo, the early formations of the embryo, the neural crest, one of the early tissues that is formed is the blood tissue, very early. And that is related also to precursor molecules. It's a very complex situation. What I'm talking about is there a precursor molecule that has its origin in the embryonic tissue, that manifests itself in the neurological tissue, in the blood tissue. Why is it that melanin is found in different kinds of cells? It's not very cell-specific as such. Does it have a common precursor molecule that eventually differentiates and becomes very specific in different types of cells?
Dr. Johnson, Dr. Isaac, what is the chemical relationship, similarity or difference between hemoglobin and melanin? Are they structurally similar? Do they have the same pathway, or do they come off a related pathway? Is the similarity between hemoglobin and melanin more than just superficial similarity in possessing the acute color?
I would say that they're very, very different. Hemoglobin has porphyrin ring system, it has iron, and it has peptide chains. There are no peptide chains in melanin. There's no metal in melanin.
And hemoglobin is a protein.
Yes, hemoglobin is more of a protein. And so when you classify it, indeed it's very different. Now, melanin has certain portions, like I see some of perhaps methionine. You can see where tyrosine was there at some point. But the structure, yeah, the indole system is there. But the structure, I would say, is really very, very different.
Very, very different.
Let me ask you, could it be a precursor?
You see the ring over to the left of the spiral ring? He has, without the globin is not important here, but in the synthesis, yeah, in the synthesis of heme, there are a whole lot of enzymes that go on, and with P450 system in my work, I studied the heme pathway, and the molecule is cyclic with those 4 chiral rings, and right before heme, there is an enzyme called ferrochelatase that inserts reduced iron, Fe2, into the molecule, then it becomes heme.
All right,
Then
and that's right. If we only talk about heme, that's broken hemoglobin.
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment because you were getting very technical here. And just may I ask this?
I just wanted to let the audience know that they are related, but they're not the same.
Oh, right. As Bob pointed out in his introduction, melanin has been associated with a lot of cultural things. And I want to ask the scientists, is there a fairly sound scientific basis for saying that melanin may be linked to language and religion and dance and music and jazz. Would you please address that issue?
I have to say that's the part I'm most uncomfortable with. Not so much from the point of view of it being emotionally appealing or psychologically appealing to me, but if you're talking about it from the point of view of science, I would be interested in knowing more about those scientific underpinnings that have resulted in that particular. Is it a conclusion or is it an inference? I think that's a real issue with melanin because its expression has a social political response beyond its considerable scientific merit. And I would be interested in knowing what are the real scientific bases or some of the real scientific bases for these particular claims. Are they inferences or are they in the realm of science now? Because mind you, science is only one way that a person comes to understand his or her environment. So I'm asking for some of the scientific evidence for those particular, some of those particular things.
I think that our speaker for this evening, certainly, he would be excited to get that question.
Yes, and I'm
but it sort of lies within the realm of his investigation. The one thing that is known is that melanin can take light energy and convert it into sound energy and convert sound energy back into light energy.
Could you explain that a little more, please?
Okay. Where's Professor Hunter Adams?
I mean, maybe the person explain that to me, please.
I don't know the whole details. Dr. Hunter Adams is far more equipped with that than I am. But I do know that studying color response, that all colors have rings with electrons flowing in those rings. And that when light hits color, the electrons bounce off and go to a higher realm. And when they come back down, they give off light.
Right.
Therefore,
That I follow.
we are on a different wavelength than those who don't have melanin. And that's right. And then, have you been to churches where
But I don't see how that follows scientifically. I mean, yes, the electrons going to a high energy, falling back to a lower energy is giving off light energy. But then the leap to we sing better or when we're in church, I don't follow it.
Well, this is where neuromelanin comes in.
That's right. Yeah, neurological something there with.
Is that influence or is that?
No, I don't think it's different.
No,
I think if you look at I think if you look at the hypothalamic relationship with the melatonin and its influence on behavior and specifically, which I know there's evidence for sexual drive and so forth. I think that's where that comes in, the behavior tied in with the neurotransmitters.
When you go to these churches, people hear the gospel in those so-called sanctified churches. They hear the message and they get carried away. They go into a trance. They go out. And people theoretically relate that to that contact in their psyche that has to do with control of melanin and their response to spirituality.
Also, the pineal plays a role there too. Pineal gland. I always want speaking back on something that Doris was saying.
It had to do with movement. I was just going to ask the scientists. As a matter of fact, this has been such a stimulating and interesting discussion here. And I'm not a scientist, so I couldn't jump in on any of that conversation. But then we know that melanin is linked with the central nervous system. And we know that the nervous system is the controller of movement. And we know that it has those two major divisions, you know, the central and the peripheral. And we know that messages are picked up from the central nervous system, of course, and carried to the glands and the muscles. So now, since melanin is linked with that and connected with that, it can be said, and a lot of studies say that people of color or more highly melanized people have a different type of movement because of melanin. As a matter of fact, for an example, I'm going to use basketball. We refer to that a lot. And we take a look at basketball players and the number of black basketball players as opposed to white basketball players. And let's use Magic Johnson as an example because everybody's familiar with him. It seems like his movements are so quick, it can almost be said that message is transmitted to the muscles and the glands even almost without thought. You know, that he almost moves out of reflex without actually having to think about that. So I was wondering if perhaps some of the scientists could address that.
You know, it's what they call muscle memory. But certainly, if you take the concept that melanin can store information, and if the melanin is dispersed throughout the muscle fibers, then in a sense, that's where your memory is. That it does not have to go to the brain and come back, that it's already in the muscles because the melanin itself contains information. Now, that is extremely controversial, but many people are saying that is precisely what melanin does. I have an article here by Carol Barnes, a chemist who has done a lot of research with melanin. And on the very point that we were discussing, he makes a statement that melanin can cause altered states of consciousness, such as the shouting and speaking in tongues experienced in black religious ceremonies, the creation of jazz music, and even spiking the football and dancing in the end zone after a touchdown has been scored. And he references several articles from the Journal of Theoretical Biology. So some serious scientists are indeed beginning to pick up on that point. And then sometimes we know things based on intuition. To go back to the African way of knowing. Many of the most esteemed physicists are now amazed at what the sages and mystics were able to state about nature, the Dogon. The fact that they make almost identical statements that physicists will make about an observation after they have used $1 million piece of instrument to try to get some understanding on that phenomenon. But yet, on another part of the world, someone is sitting in a cave and they talk about the interconnectedness, they talk about the dualism of matter, you know, energy and matter are the same thing, just different forms. It took Einstein to give that equation before people accepted that. But there were some folks who were making that same statement based on intuition. So it almost looks like today we're coming into a situation where the Western scientific method versus the African system of inquiry are sort of perhaps coming into, I don't want to say conflict, but certainly those two sides need to be considered. There was a conference last year on the African system of inquiry, scientific inquiry. And there's some very serious scientists who believe that we need to bring in that approach in addition to the Western approach. So when you raise some of these questions, how do we know? Well, sometimes we know intuitively. And it waits to be demonstrated that it can be verified by the Western way. And until it's done that way, it's not considered to be a scientific fact. You know, with the situation in Kenya, with the, what's the molecule? Chemicals. studied over 2,000 people, and they have pretty good evidence that it does indeed help those with AIDS. But the Western world said, no, we don't believe any of this, and the reason why? You haven't done a double-blind experiment. Double-blind means you give one group of people the medicine, and you give another group of people not the medicine. And what the position is in Africa, we're not going to sacrifice somebody just to verify this. We know it from 2,000 cases. And when you study AIDS in this country, you get cases 50, 20, 30 people. And how do you compare that type of study with the study where they've studied 2,000 people? And yet the world is saying, well, we don't believe it because you haven't done the double blind. And the folks in Africa are saying, well, we're not going to put 100 people over here and give 50 of them medicine and other 50 not, just to prove a point. We know it works. So you get this type of conflict very often between the different ways of knowing. And so some of this, I believe, what we know about melanin, maybe it has not been substantiated by the Western system of inquiry. And I don't know if we have to wait until the information is substantiated that way.
You don't have to wait. Do your own thing. Because we did it before they came out of case.
After we let our guests in, after we do anything.
My name is Martina, assistant with Professor Owen's class. My question is, some of you have addressed it, is it a myth the term melanin is used as a way to say that black people have a certain way? I think you mentioned that. I mean, there's, like in this case, you said you had black is beautiful. Now it seems like it's melanin all of a sudden is the new wonder drug that black people are black or just the personality, the person themselves. Is it because they have a thing called melanin? Is it because of that they are reacting a certain way, that they are defining themselves a certain way? I mean, what's this wonder thing melanin has to do with how we're treated socially and culturally, etc. Is that too vague?
No, I think that what people are saying is, just like you said in the 60s, we used the term black is beautiful, race, pride. Now they're saying we don't have to conjure up a color, that we have a chemical that we should know is special and feel very proud about. What some people are really saying is that we've lost the ability to utilize this chemical to its maximum. But if young people begin to feel that because I have the melanin, and that's something very positive as opposed to negative, because we've always been told that because of our color we're less than. And now you can imagine a 6-year-old kid feeling that, hey, because I got this melanin, I'm special. And that I can fly as high as I want to go in terms of, my achievements intellectually and athletically. It creates a different mindset as opposed to feeling that I got this melanin and I need to, try to make it light. You remember in the old days when they used to sell those creams to lighten us up? Which one? Ultra, right? In other words, they were saying to us that we didn't want to keep this dark color. We need to do everything we could to lighten up. Now, imagine the change if you believe that there is a chemical that really is something very positive to have, and that somehow or another you feel very good about yourself because you have the melanin, and that all these other things that have been said about dark being negative, you just dismiss that because you know that this molecule can give you special properties. So I think that many people, like Public Enemy, are using it in that vein. They're saying that we got something that God gave us, to help us survive and evolve on this planet.
I also like to say something that's not very scientific in terms. I don't have the data, but socially, Dr. Johnson is correct in the fact that there studies have been done in Africa, and the tendency in science, especially the Western world, is they're doing this research. It's credible. As long as research is being done here, then it's credible. If it's done in Japan, when you go to these conferences, the Japanese now they're being recognized, but for a long time, if they did research in Japan, if it wasn't published in an American journal, it wasn't credible. It just they didn't pay any attention to it. And part of the problem is just that
affect the geographical location of where the research is done. And then something else, social. You know, even with learning, the melanin, our people really, to me, and I know this to be true, we are the smarter ones, we're the strong ones, we're the dominant ones. We just haven't been given the opportunity. I mean, if you look in predominantly white schools where they take in the token blacks, the blacks stay at the top of the class. So we just have not been given the chance. They have to keep us down so we don't express this melanin. I don't have any scientific answer to that.
Can I ask another question about it?
No, scientific.
I know it raises another issue related to that. Does it mean, are you saying that we have to embrace and recognize our melanin in order to express our potential as human beings? And if we don't embrace our melanin, and we don't recognize our melanin, that we will be kept down. Society. Is that the issue? I'm raising the issue.
No, I think Doris, look, could you ask the same question in this way? Does it mean that if we don't embrace ourselves as black people, that we have...
That's the question.
That's the question I'm asking. Is it the molecule, or is it who we are as human beings? That we validate ourselves as to who we are, proud people, human beings, part of this world. And that color, that it doesn't hurt, that we must free ourselves. No, that's certainly true. What I'm saying is, are we asking ourselves, but I think it's the issue, the social, political issue of is it the molecule, or is it all? Or is it all that we are?
Part of the question is, you know, as that army commercial says, be all that you can be. All right, now, if you don't embrace the melanin, one can argue that you might be a little less than you can be.
Right.
Be the best that you can be. And if you have this tool to utilize it, then why not utilize it?
Listen to what I'm trying to make. If melanin by itself, the molecule, and I'm not discounting the kind of things that we're discussing here. What I'm asking is, if melanin by virtue of your possession of it gives you these things, then who can stop us? Why are we stopped? Why do we When you answer the question, when you give me that answer, you say to me, your answer negates the importance of melanin for the thing we're talking about. If you say that others have kept us down, all right, and we feel bad about our melanin, and so we stay down. If the possession of melanin gives you all of these things, who could stop us? What social system could stop us?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let me jump in.
I'd like to make a point
And I'm talking about whether or not we embrace who we are.
I think it's critical to go back to the point that I made at the outset, having to do with ways of experiencing the world and the difference between the Western and Western scientific as opposed to African and African scientific view of the world is that the latter is inclusive. We don't say it's got to be either this or that. And it is not inclusive. We recognize the interaction of our biochemical cells with our spiritual cells and all of that operating together. And if you impact negatively on an aspect, we are going to be diminished as beings in the total sense. It doesn't mean we're wiped out, it means we are diminished. But all of this interacts. The melanin molecule is a vital component in that total sense.
I think there might be an analogy with the sun. You know, I mean, we wouldn't have a life. We wouldn't be alive if we didn't have the sun.
Well, we don't worship the sun, and we don't, feel that we owe everything to the sun, but it's a fact that if we did not have the sun, we wouldn't be living. So with the melanin, I mean, we don't want to go into the historical reasons why we are an oppressed people at this time in our society. But we go back to the Egyptians and what they did and so forth and so on. But the fact that we have the melanin will not negate the fact that, to me, it makes us a superior people.
Okay, can I interrupt at this point and take a question from the audience?
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much.
Sorry I'm late. I just come in, so I may state something that may have already been said. But I want to preface what I'm going to say by giving you a quotation by Wole Soyinka, the recognized African playwright, I guess the only African with a Nobel Prize in literature. And in the 60s, when the whole cultural revolution was going on, the concept of black is beautiful, Wole Soyinka made a statement as an extension of Leopold Senghor's concept of negritude, the idea of blackness. And what Wole Soyinka said was that a tiger does not, underline not, a tiger does not shout about its tigress. I think that statement speaks for itself. It calls us to question certain assumptions we have about the notion of blackness, about the notion of color, ultimately about the concept of race. Because United Nations Scientific Cultural Organization, UNESCO, in the 50s came out with a statement about race, which by implication stated that there's no really any such concept as race, because if you go back to history and human migrations, we find that ultimately there have been so many miscegenations, mixings over time. But Dr. Sheila Miles Johnson made a statement now in response to what Dr. Willa said about the relationship between melanin, the African way of looking and seeing things. The problem I have is whether we can actually equate biological characteristics with behavior to the extent that that behavior becomes an end result of biological characteristics, as opposed to the role that, historically speaking, environment has played in determining certain behavior patterns. And I think that if we begin to look at the relationship, the interplay between environment and biology, one thing becomes very, very clear. All through time, across groups, there has been this interplay. If that is so, we must then ask the question, in talking about the African worldview, in talking about the concept of holism, in talking about the idea that for the African worldview, the assumptions are that good and bad exist on the same side of the coin. They essentially represent continuums. The question is it because of the blackness of your skin? Or is it because of the evolutionary factors that are interplayed with the environment over time to create a unique way of looking at life? But even beyond that, Dr. Ferdinand talks about knowing through intuition. Let's not deal with the scientific evidence about it, that perhaps she knows that because of our melanin that we are superior. I think that one way of perhaps trying to determine whether that is the case is to go back in time to history, the origins of world civilization, and the role and the contribution that each of the various groups have played over time. In looking at that, certain things become obvious. Firstly, we as blacks have been in the forefront of world civilization. There's no doubt that when we look at the areas of the Euphrates, the Tigris rivers, when we look at the ancient empires of Mesopotamia, and ultimately Egypt, and from Egypt to Greece, to Rome, and then Western society, that we are squarely in the forefront and in the center of world civilization. But that should not also negate the role that other groups have played. In short, the point I'm making is that there is no doubt that as black peoples, we have been in the center of world civilization. We have influenced what we today call Western civilization. But my point, though, is, have we done that because of our blackness? Have we done that because of the unique environment we had to deal with? And in interaction with that unique environment, have created the kinds of historical activities that ultimately has put us center stage in terms of world history. I'm not saying that in talking about melanin today, that is not important. I think it's important to the extent that it helps us to understand that we are black and we are beautiful and we must be proud of it. That is very, very important. From that psychological point of view, it is definitely something to celebrate. It is something to put center stage. But by the same token, we must also be very clear in terms of the reasons we have achieved. I'm putting it to you that we have achieved not just because we are black, but we've achieved because we are human. And because we are human, we have defined our own reality and our own destiny. And we are going to continue to achieve for that reason. Thank you very much.
It seems a major part of the way you phrase the question, Curtis, unless he harkens back to a frame of a Western frame of reference, which is, have we achieved because, or have we achieved because? And my sense is that there is no either or. We are not saying that the melanin molecule is the end-all be-all. We're saying that it interacts in vital ways with everything, including environment.
I accept what you said. I have an identity in a second, so I have to plead. But I accept what you said, Dr. Shilama Johnson. I think I've posed my question the way I've done for deliberate reasons. Because if we begin by accepting the notion of continuity and oneness in terms of the African worldview, African postulates, then for you to react to what I've said, I have to create a dichotomy. Okay, and that dichotomy is the question of this or that. Therefore, you have to respond to it, and hence the debate will happen. I think that although we accept where we've come from and where we're going, we also have to deal with the other situations, because one of the problems we've had has been that for the longest time, Western society had a tendency to create models based on Western realities and superimpose those models on non-Western societies. And where those models, as is always the case, do not bear out the influences of Western societies, then by implication we must be weird, we must be strange or primitive or whatever. So what I'm saying is that I accept who I am and who we are. But in order for us to react and explore that some more, I had to pose my question in Western terms. Okay, so that we have the response. Thank you very much.
I think part of what we're trying to do is to explore the possibilities that there are other ways, other terms besides Western terms, and perhaps we need to be familiar and comfortable with using them and finding out, being aware that there are.
You know, one of the provost had to leave, but one of the things that talking about the African, historically and up to this day, has always been the most humane individual on this planet. There's no doubt about the humanity of the African. That's why we got in trouble, because we were too humane. The second point is that the African always operated in what we call the 3 C's: collectivism, cooperatism, and communism, in contrast to the Caucasian who work with the ice mentality: individualism, fierce competition, and envy. You have these non-melanin people coming and interacting or in contact with melanin people, and that's what you have, the ice mentality.
There is a book called The Ice Band Inheritance by Michael Bradley. And if you read that book, you will find that he does characterize the Neanderthal type mentality that we need to look at. Thousands of years in the ice probably could change the mentality, just like it could change the pigment and the hair texture. Dr. Ben wrote a book called Black Man of the Nile, and in chapter 1, he gives quotation after quotation how the Europeans systematically inferiorized the black race or the African race. And there is a quotation taken from a book related to the Torah that says that Canaan, the sons of Canaan, the firstborn of Ham, are black, thick lips, more subject to sex, woolly hair, and so on. And that's in the Jewish libraries. They read this and they silently walk around with this in their heads. So they have, yeah, that too. They have systematically, there are many quotations I can give to you, but they have systematically, historically inferiorized and put us down. Now, back to the point I wanted to mention earlier about the Michael Jordan turning 360 degrees in the air and our dancing, break dance, and hip hop and so on. There's a commonality in how we behave throughout the world. You go to Russia, you see the brothers can do things that look like things we do here. Look at the African dancers from Senegal and the rest of the places. They're doing what we do here. And nobody told each other what they were doing and they went to school to learn that. And in relation to that, scientifically, I can say that if you trace a neuron, just like an electric wire which emanates throughout your system in order for you to your muscles to react and so on, if you trace that neuron, or if you analyze that neuron, you find melanin there. Now, that melanin molecule here, whether it's the whole molecule or part of the molecule, if you look at it, you have to see a lot of oxygenated bonds. They're oxygen double bonds. And when light hit that rearranges those electrical units there such that you get free radicals. And it is thought that melanin acts as a sink for those free radicals. So if you have a lot of melanin, you have a lot of free radicals which energize you. That gives you energy once light hits it. So that's probably the reason, theoretically, the reason for the behavior common to black people throughout. And also there are a lot of myths that they associate with us, like the penis myth and of course the dancing is not a myth, but there are a lot of ways and little mythological ways in which they have characterized us, and we behave and respond to it as if they were true. So that we are somewhat the reason for some of our inferiority feeling. Of course, that's changing now. But as we study and learn about melanin, we probably change a lot of that.
Let me say one last piece back on what she said, that if you compare the substantial nigra of African and the substantial nigra of the Caucasian, you'll see the substantial nigra is an area in the brain. Okay? Very deep. So what happens that you will find that the African has much more neuromelanin in this area than the Caucasian. They know this. They have proven it. So they'll let you know behavior, intelligence, and a host of other things that flow.
Yes, I agree. The point that Provost was speaking to me and some of the students
was that there is some relationship, a very strong one, between culture and between the environment and what we are. And that unless we have awareness and that we have cultural connection, even what we are has the potential to be, we cannot do. So that there has to be a relationship, a holistic one, between environment and between what an individual is biologically. Because if environment were not important, then there would be no diminution of our wonderful talent, of the potentials we have as human beings. So that while we discuss the biological basis for a lot of who and what we are, it cannot stand by itself. It must stand in relation to culture. It must stand in relation to our connection with our past, and that is not an amount to by itself.
Well, I think
That's the thing. I'm trying to make that point. I'm not diminishing or saying melanin is not important. I'm not making an either or statement. In fact, I'm making a holistic one.
right, but then I think that was the statement that Sheila was trying to convey earlier. That we cannot compartmentalize and fragment what we say about melanin, that it has to be considered as a whole. And that would certainly include culture, include our environment, and other factors. I think we've had a very lively discussion this morning. I think that for those who sat in, that certain consciousness was perhaps raised, probably new information, and probably a better feeling of exactly where we stand on the melanin issue. That there is much, much more studying that needs to be done, that this is something that we need to consider, and how it impacts on our lives today. And I suspect what we've tried to do is to be cautious and not make extravagant statements, that we're trying to balance what we know from the Western scientific inquiry with what we can also know from the African way of inquiry. And that probably we all should be excited to look to the future, because we're going to learn much, much more about the melanin molecule and how we can utilize it. I'd like to thank the faculty and remind you that the conference continues, that this afternoon at 1:15 there's going to be a children's presentation in which there will be a skit emphasizing melanin, presented in a way that young people can probably get a very good feeling about what melanin is. And so if you have time, I would certainly welcome you back. Tell your classmates. It's probably going to be very interesting to see how young people respond to the presentation this afternoon. And then from 3 o'clock until about 6, there will be some continuous slide production or presentation. Dr. Isaac, who is on the table with us, will be conducting the slide presentation. And then I certainly want to emphasize that this evening at 7 o'clock, we're going to have a keynote address by certainly one of the out front persons in terms of scientific investigation of melanin. Professor Hunter Adams will speak to us this evening on the myths, mysteries, and metaphors of melanin, dangers of reducing biology to ideology. And I think that that pretty much encompasses much of what we have been discussing today. So thank you for your attendance, and I hope that you can come back around 1:15 for the children's presentation. Very nice presentation, folks. I got one. Because
anything at all about melanin. Yo, brother, what's wrong with you? You looking so sad. Come on over here. Let me talk to you. What's the matter with you, brother?
I don't know why I gotta be so dark.
You're lucky you're dark. That means that you have a lot of melanin.
What's melanin?
Oh, melanin is a very special gift. Let's take a look inside of a real cool melanin molecule. Real cool, real cool, real cool, real cool. Real cool, real cool, real cool. The melanin molecule.
Part of the puzzle, part of the puzzle. Put it all together. This is part of the puzzle, part of the puzzle. Put it all together. Part of the
H-O-N-C-H-N-H-C-H-C-H-N-O-N. It's just part of the puzzle, part of the puzzle. Put it all together. Be real cool, use that tool. Know what you're all about. Investigate, don't procrastinate. Check it out, check it out, check it out. Real cool. It's just part of the puzzle, part of the puzzle. athletic power beyond compare, academic thinking, holistic linking. Take a look, you'll find it all there. Oh, HONCHNHCHCHCHNON. HONCHCHNHCHCHNON. It's just part of the puzzle, part of the puzzle. Put it all together. It's just part of the puzzle, part of the puzzle. Put it all together. Inside the melanin molecule, you will find it's what gives you the color of your hair, your eyes, and your beautiful black skin. So never doubt for a moment, brother, that you have been cursed. You are very black and beautiful. Let me ask you a question. Why do you suppose you were born with kinky hair and a flat, broad nose, big, thick lips and dark brown skin? I ain't starving for attention. Just let me begin. If black is beautiful, there's nothing wrong. Or haven't you heard the black coffee is strong? The blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. The law was made by Mother Nature, not by Mother Goose. I will give you this advice. It's fresh and it's free. There ain't nothing wrong with being black like me. Now, black is beautiful. What happened to that? You turn in light and smoking crack, putting blonde in your hair when the money arose. You spent $5,000 to straighten your nose. You started cherrying up your kinky hair. But brothers and sisters, aren't you aware? You're letting the man invade your world. You even did a little dance you call the white girl. You're looking at them, but you can't see. Pale faces at the beach, pale faces at the beach, pale faces at the beach get black like me. So don't worry about being black, brother. Be black and be strong, because that means that you have a lot of melanin in your body. Come on, let me take you over to a school, PS5, I believe. They have been writing to the Melanin Megaforce. That's what I'm a part of. And they put together some skits about melanin. Maybe they will help you understand how gifted you really are. Real cool. Real cool. Real cool. Real cool. Now, have you ever thought that something as simple and basic as basketball can put all of your melanin to the test? Here are some students who put together one of Air Jordan's famous moves in slow motion, letting us know how our melanin fits together in that part of the puzzle. Now here we have your basic schoolyard scene, and it's down to the last point, the winning point. But as you can see, in slow motion, we're going to slow it down so that you can see the melanin in action. Why? With your melanin, you're able to calculate within a blink of an eye, change your position, and speed up or slow down in mid-air. Watch him fake him out now. All of this in a blink of an eye. Point made. So you see, you can't make moves like the Air Jordan unless you are sufficiently melanized. Next, we're going to see a group of young ladies who are in the youth schoolyard playing a game of rope. Now, the first group we're going to see, well, they may not be sufficiently melanized, and they jump rope like this. Maybe we need to bring out some sisters who are sufficiently melanized to give them a taste of what rope really can be like. a lesson in how people with melanin can jump.
All right.
It ain't wrong, it's strong. It ain't wrong, it's just different, and it's sufficiently melanized. Now, it takes a lot to get your body to coordinate in all those different areas and put out those rhythms. Now, in another part of the schoolyard, we found a young brother who is not sufficiently melanized trying to groove with the moves. Now, some brothers who are sufficiently melanized are scoping them out. Do you think he needs a dance lesson? All right, where the sisters at? We need some home girls. Now, one thing I gotta say, if we're so black and what we have is not good, then there wouldn't be any need for a vanilla ice, would there? What do you need? What do you need? But not only do you need the melanin, you have to learn how to activate your melanin state. What you gonna do? Activate. What? So we're gonna have our rappers come back and give you a little tune to groove on so you know how to what? Activate your melanin. All right.
Activate. Your melanin state. Activate. Your melanin state. Activate. Your melanin state. Your melanin state. Melanin is not just the color of your skin. It goes deep, deep, deeper than that. It helps us do a lot of things with still restoration effect. But one thing that we can agree, our minds is the feeling key. It's where 12 areas of melanin are found, and that's more in our bodies keeping us safe and sound. Our mind, our body, our spirits, force, combine to keep the beat. Our natural rhythm, our eternal source, and what makes us complete. So turn that key, unlock that force that beats within. Don't hesitate to activate, tune into your melanin. There are some folks out there who don't want you to succeed. That's because they're blinded by ignorance and greed. They'll tell you you are worthless and have no hint to read. Don't fall for that negative garbage. Check it out and you will see. You gotta activate your melanin state to keep a positive frame of mind. Tune into your internal beat and leave all that negative stuff behind. You gotta activate. You gotta activate. You gotta activate your melanin state. You gotta activate. You gotta activate. Maybe there's things you don't understand, things you want to know. You have the power to investigate, to find out where you can go. Just activate. Just activate. You have a historical foundation that goes back to where time began. I know you'll agree, check it out, and you will see we had a master plan. So to keep your mind in a positive frame, here's all you have to do. Remember that you're in control. Be proud of the melanin in you. Just activate. Just activate. Our scientists, inventors, and engineers, mathematicians, doctors, our brave pioneers, our heroes, and our heroines will all tune into the melanin.
So what you gonna do?
Just activate. Your melanin state gotta 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 activate. What? Your melanin state gotta activate. 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 Your melanin state.
All right, folks. These are the students of PS5. All right, I hope you learned a little about melanin. I hope you start researching and using the force. May the force be with you. The melanin force that is. I would like to thank Richard Barcliffe, the coordinator over at PS3, for lending me his students for these past 3 or 4 days. It's been a pleasure, and I hope if you did did enjoy it, especially all of our little people down there. Appreciate your black, beautiful skin, whether it's light brown, whether it's deep chocolate, or whether it's blue-black. The melanin is working for you. Thank you.
This slide is very appropriate because historically, images of African people have been distorted. Up to today, it is distorted because you're told you're nothing, you're lazy, you're shiftless. Yet, we, the people who are supposed to be shiftless, were kidnapped from our homeland to build civilization. That's a contradiction. Next slide, please. And this, as I always like to open my presentation, don't be fooled by the cover up. And you see who's doing the covering up, don't you? Right? Is it clear we know who's doing the covering up? You don't need for me to say further, right? Now, next slide. Can you just turn the focus? Now, this is Newsweek, January 1988. The scientists are doing research for Adam and Eve. And as you see, they found Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are us, melanized people. If it were not so, it wouldn't be there. You know they would put their own image up there. Next slide, please. One of the things we are accustomed to here is to talk about Greco-Roman architecture. I want you to look very close at this type of architecture they have there. The first one is referred to as Roman Corinthian order. The second is referred to as Roman composite capital. But pay attention to what I'm going to point out to you. You see all these platforms here? We all see them? All these flowers up here? Next slide. This is Brooklyn Municipal Building, Baltimore. We're in Brooklyn, so I chose this one. And here you see the same design. This is what they refer to as Greco-Roman architecture. All of these. Next slide. Most of you know the Masonic Temple, Lafayette. That's what you're looking at. Can we, how we can get the lights dim? So they can see more better detail. Now I want you to make out to see the detail here and these here, so you can appreciate the legacy which has been left to us by melanized people, namely Africans, which the European has run away with. Anyway, whilst they're doing that, let me stress the point again which I'm making. What I'm doing is letting you see things that's all around you. You see every day, you pass it, but you're not aware of the fact that these are things which have been left to us by our African ancestors, not the Europeans. The Europeans did not have the mental capacity to even think about designing and such as you see here. 15,000 years after Africans had discovered the science of agriculture, this is when the Europeans learned it. The Europeans learned from 15,000 years after Africans had discovered and were doing scientific architecture or agriculture. You need to understand this. This is part of the legacy that has been left us. This is one of the missing pages of the World Book of History. These are pages which have been suppressed, pages which have been thrown out, pages which have been removed for the purpose of keeping you in mental bondage. Now, oh, where do you have to go to turn this thing down? Anyway, because it's important for you to see, because I want you when you leave here today, as you go around in your daily life, you'll be able to recognize these things, point them out to your relatives, point them out to your spouse, or whoever says, this is African, this is ours. Because you see them, but you don't know it is a legacy that was left to you while you're in seven. Where is this guy? Huh? You got it up there, that's where it's turning down? Yeah, keep turning down, I want it out. Out. Yeah, that's why I want it out. Right. Oh, good. Can we see better now? Yeah.